What's going on, guys? P-Dog here, bringing a very special video. It's not too often I do these very you serious? Alright. Jeez. Actually, let's see if this works. That's better. What's going on, guys? P-Dog here, bringing a very special video. It's quite rare that I make these kind of videos, but I really wanted to get my 2 cents out on this particular game. You know, it's quite rare when I feel so split when it comes to video games that I've played, and so in the rare times that it does happen, I want to look deeper into why that's the case. And that was especially what happened when I played Don't Nod's Life is Strange. You know, it's not often that my opinions on a game are so contrasting when I look into different aspects of it. You need only look at episode 1 and then episode 5 of my peak plays to see how differently I treat the game. There are parts of Life is Strange I really love, there are parts of it I really hate, parts are pretentious, parts are heartfelt, parts are meaningful, parts are meaningless, just how? Well, I'm going to look into this further, and I made sure to do my research. I played the game from start to finish for my YouTube channel, played it from start to finish again, making different choices and even getting every achievement. I put almost 35 hours into this game since I bought it 3 months ago. I even went onto YouTube and watched playthroughs of it from people who loved it, people who hated it, and people who were indifferent to it. I really wanted to ensure that when I talked about this game, it's well informed and the most effective way for me to communicate my thoughts on the game. The point is, I think the game is good. It's one heck of an interesting experience, but it missed the ball on being truly great. But the potential is still certainly there. Before I begin dissecting smaller pieces of this game, I want to give some background into how I'll be viewing it. You see, in my opinion, all video games sit somewhere on a line, a continuum. On one side of the line are gameplay driven games, so games that have all gameplay and virtually no story. So a game like early Minecraft or Garry's Mod, for example, would sit pretty comfortably on this side of the line. On the other side of the line are story-driven games, or walking simulators as some people call them, games that are basically, their only purpose is to tell you a story and incorporate very little gameplay into it. So a game like Dear Esther or Everybody's Gone to the Rapture would sit very comfortably in this side of the line. To put it into perspective, a game like The Last of Us I think is a very good example of having this balance between gameplay and story, putting emphasis in both factors equally. With this in mind, I would say Life is Strange sits very comfortably deep in the story-driven part of the line. The only reason why I'm bringing all this up is because game developers focus on what side of the line they lie on and put more emphasis on those factors of their story. So with this in mind, I'll be viewing Life is Strange a lot more for its story elements like plot, characters and visuals over gameplay elements. So with that in mind, let's get stuck in. In Life is Strange, you play as Maxine.
Max. Never Maxine.
Okay, sorry, sheesh. Max Caulfield, a photography student trying to discover herself and fit in at Blackwell Academy, a prestigious college located in the fictitious seaside resort of Arcadia Bay, Oregon. Or at least, that's what she thinks, until she discovers that she can manipulate time. She uses this to save her childhood friend Chloe Price from getting shot in a bathroom, and from then, the pair try to get to the bottom of some of Arcadia Bay's many mysteries, like the mysteriously wealthy and powerful Prescott family, the disappearance of a girl named Rachel Amber, and also of an impending tornado that could potentially wipe out the town and everyone in it. The story as a whole is pretty intriguing. Right from the get-go, the game throws around 3 or 4 different mysteries at you, which begin to unravel the more you play the game, and despite a slow start, the game really begins to pick up. Even just one of these big plot points could have easily been a game of its own, but putting them all together and seeing how they connect to one another is really quite admirable. The thing that really struck me when I first played this game was how different it felt. And I don't mean gameplay wise, I'm talking atmospherically. The world of Arcadia Bay and the people who inhabit it are incredibly quirky and, quite frankly, unlike anything I've ever seen in a mainstream video game before. Now, this is where a lot of people's opinions of the game begin to shift. The world created is built on a foundation of internet and hip culture. Characters spout out internet memes as if they're common greetings, including the main character, and it certainly takes some getting used to, especially in the first episode. A way to compare it is to think about characters in movies like the Coen brothers' Fargo or Jason Reitman's Juno, in which the world and the characters in that world have their own quirks, and as an audience member, it takes some getting used to.
Hey, they said they were going to the Twin Cities.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, is that useful to you?
Oh, you betcha, yeah.
Yeah.
If you can believe it, your entire enjoyment of the game can depend on this very fact, because many many areas of the game are influenced by it. You'll see this more as this review continues. The dialogue is pretty quirky, but also suffers slightly from being very hyperbolic and, in some instances, just a little too ridiculous even for my suspended disbelief.
Now you're totally stuck in the retro zone. Sad face.
Did she just say sad face, like, non-ironically? Did he just say sad face?
Over social
Oh my
medias.
gosh.
Now, why don't you go fuck your selfie?
Oh!
Oh yes, Victoria.
Did she just say that?
Out of my way.
Oh my gosh, that one was... Okay, I thought sad face was bad. That was terrible.
Understand English?
But maybe that only adds to the charm of the setting and the world created. If one thing's for certain, I have to give Don't Nod credit because there's a lot of effort made in making this world feel unique. You need only look around any of the locations to see graffiti, animals, just little details that they didn't need to include, but they did anyway, to make the town feel more beautiful and alive. Speaking of little details, the game has a very interesting way of telling more of the story through unconventional methods. This stuff isn't compulsory to understanding the plot, but it further proves the point that Don't Nod went a long way to add extra details, to make players that want to get more invested in the game have the means to do so. Max receives and replies to texts throughout the game, from characters that she meets, which help add a little more into the development of the characters of the game. She can take photos with her camera, heck, she even keeps a journal around with her and documents events of the game as they happen with her added thoughts. Is it really necessary considering you hear her inner thoughts as these events happen in real time? Not really, but the hand-drawn illustrations and extra comments do add to the overall point that I'm trying to make, that a lot of work was put into making the world of Life is Strange feel unique. I would at least recommend reading the prologue pages of the journal to get you started. Plus, I really like the soundtrack to this game. This is a good example of what I mentioned earlier regarding the hip culture vibe the game has, in that around 80% of the music in this game consists of acoustic indie tracks. And yes, I know I gave it crap in my peak plays, and normally I would have gripes about the lack of variety in music, but given the universe created and the fact that our main character does enjoy that genre herself, I can understand why that's the case. So, the soundtrack is a big plus to anyone who's a fan of that style of music. It even made it onto my Spotify saved playlists. I'm sure it wasn't cheap to get the licenses for the game, so I appreciate the effort made there. It's pretty high quality, even if Sid Matters does want your YouTube dollars badly. Come on man, seriously? The art style of the game complements all this, with just the general look of the game appearing like it came out of a graphic novel of sorts. But much like every story-based episodic game, expect the graphics to not be as polished as most other big games out there. The difference here is that it looks like they put a lot more of the budget into the bigger spectacles like the tornado or other big events over basic animation like lip syncing. While I do appreciate how pretty the world looked and how detailed these spectacles were, the lip syncing is quite bad, and especially noticeable on my second playthrough when I was trying to get engrossed into it. Also, might be a little nitpicky here, but I would have appreciated some more body animations. Most of the characters just stand idle as you talk to them. It doesn't really look like there's a lot of life to them. In addition, most of the conversations are simply one-on-one. There's very few times that you speak to more than just one person at a time, and when it does happen, you really have no control over the flow of the conversation. You just kind of stand there and listen until you make a side with X or side with Y decision that determines the outcome. I don't know, I would have liked to have seen more variety in these areas, but it's stuff I'm willing to forgive given the time constraints and budgetary issues these games usually have. The general gameplay of Life is Strange is pretty standard for this genre of game. You know, walking around, interacting with stuff, choosing dialogue options, that sort of stuff. Although smaller gameplay mechanics are added later, these three things are what occupy a lot of the gameplay portions of Life is Strange, and they work pretty well. It's functional enough, and most of the time, Max adds her inner commentary to events surrounding her, so you don't get too bored. Not to mention the texting and journal from earlier. Choices play a big part in a player choice game, surprise surprise, and I'm glad to say that Life is Strange incorporated these player choices pretty well throughout. I especially noticed this in my second playthrough when a lot of the choices I made earlier are referenced to quite a lot in later episodes. It certainly made me feel like I was moulding my gameplay experience to be different from the first time I played it. Yes, it does still hit the same obligatory story points, but that's something that all player choice games suffer from, so I can't just fault this game for it. Plus, in some scenarios, all the little details come together and can make these bigger pieces feel a lot different depending on what you settled with in the earlier parts of the game. So it did a good job. Plus, you do have the ability to time travel, which feeds into all three areas and adds an extra layer to the gameplay. This allows players to literally rewind a decision they made and see the alternative outcomes, an element only possible in other games if you replayed the entire section. So you can rewind and potentially interact with an object differently, or pick a different thing to say to someone.
Well, when he gets here, I guess I'll just have to reason with him. I'll just have to talk him out of it, I suppose.
All right, try. Remember that he loves milkshakes.
New choice.
Remember that he's fond of cats.
New choice.
You can't reason with him.
Even with a milkshake cat?
This adds a unique flair to these scenarios, allowing you to balance which one to pick depending on the outcomes. Even if the events affected are only the short-term ones, it's pretty neat. This does, however, reduce the absolutism of your choices. You don't feel as conflicted to really make an outright decision, apart from the bigger choices in the episodes, and so it's more like which one do I stick with rather than which one do I choose. I understand that these decisions become irreversible once you leave the respective areas, but it still reduces the potential fun of a second playthrough because you know the outcome to every scenario already. But as for how the time travel is incorporated story-wise, it's a little less, shall we say, concrete. You need only look at any one of my Pete plays and you'll see instances of the time travel powers being used in ways that seem impractical, or worse yet, Max not using her powers in times that she could. I find myself frequently questioning why she wouldn't just use her powers to resolve some of the troubles she encountered, from the trivial to the extreme. The time travel aspect doesn't really make you feel like Max or anyone she's with is in any real danger if you can just rewind time and prevent said danger from happening. She's virtually a god with the superpower, possessing manipulation of time, immortality, teleportation, you know, the works. Yet, she never really seems to acknowledge that she has all this potential, and it's frustrating as a gamer, knowing something the character you're playing doesn't, even when it should be obvious to them. Not only that, but some aspects of it don't even make sense to begin with. I find this section pretty impossible to talk about without delving into spoilers, so I'll save it for later in the video, but what I will say is plot holes, plot holes, plot holes, holy freaking crap, plot holes. Anyway, but what fun would a story be without characters, and Life is Strange certainly has a few of those. Throughout the game, you learn more about Max's history with some of the characters, most notably her best friend Chloe Price. She accompanies you for a lot of your adventures, and so a lot of effort is made into giving both of these characters a lot of development as the episodes play out. The characters have a realistic way of interacting with one another, and I did believe when I was playing that these two were hella best friends forever. Oh, that really hurt to say. The back and forth were entertaining, all being incorporated with that internet hip culture that I was talking about earlier. The voice acting was pretty top notch from Hannah Tell and Ashley Birch, even if some of their dialogue was kinda cringy, but the fact remains that I had fun playing the sections involving both characters, with a lot of other players caring more about their relationship than the time travel or any of the big plot elements I mentioned earlier. However, I didn't get as engrossed into their relationship as other people did, and I have some reasons for this. While Chloe does play a big part in the story of the game, she really doesn't do much from a gameplay standpoint, and by not much, I mean practically nothing. During almost all of the adventures the two go on, it's always Max that does pretty much everything needed, even if they don't require her powers. Chloe tends to just do what most video game side characters do, just stand in an idle animation and do nothing. And I'm not expecting the next Alex Vance here, I just want her character to actually do stuff during these scenarios. I mean, sure, she's going to look through a container or browse the internet, but you know she isn't going to get anything out of it. I would even sacrifice the player discovering the answer to a puzzle if Chloe finds it out, because then I would feel like her company is more valued as opposed to just a walking thought bubble. It kind of ruins the idea that the two of them are a team when Max is the one doing all the work. Unfortunately, the amount of detail put into Max and Chloe's relationship kind of has a knock-off effect on almost every other character in the game. Minus a few exceptions, the majority of side characters have very little, well, character. They act based on one or two personality traits, and that's it. There's not a lot of effort made to make you care about them. They mainly serve as a plot device to inform you, the player, of some extra details regarding the plot. An unrealistically large amount of the side characters also just share the same opinion on stuff, which again take away any sense of individuality these characters could have had. I even made a game of it during my episode 2 Pete plays.
So the Prescotts and their finance fiends snapped up.
Yo, the Prescotts are just evil, apparently. Nobody likes them. Again, you see, oh, we hate the really powerful family. I wonder if anyone actually does like Nathan. I don't think they do. Again, look, everyone hates the Prescotts. Yeah, I love how all the bullies here are like hated by everyone. Alright, here we go, Flippin. No, of course, Flippin. Because no, yeah, he has a reputation because everyone flippin' hates him.
I have respect for David. He served his country.
Wait, really? We actually have a different opinion on David, finally? Which is really disappointing, because if each character was given the same amount of care that a character like Frank had, then I might have actually cared about them. Heck, even the technical aspects of these characters aren't as polished as Max or Chloe. Their faces barely move, and some of the voice actors just don't do a very good job, to put it bluntly. And for a game that boasts a large cast of characters, I expected more care to be put into them. Now you could argue and say the budget and time constraints restricts them from fully fleshing out every single character, but I would rather see a game with 5 well developed and fleshed out characters than a game with 15 uninteresting walking stereotypes, which is what a lot of the characters in this game are. Again, maybe it goes into the appeal of the world established, but in this case it's more a negative than a positive. Now that's not to say that every character that isn't Max or Chloe has this little detail to them. Some characters do have detail, and that works in both a positive and a negative light. Characters I mentioned earlier, like Frank and David, do have more character development as the episodes progress, even evolving depending on what choices you make. And while they weren't as fleshed out and human as I would have liked them to be, it was certainly a step in the right direction and at least made me care for them more than these characters. But there is the opposite end. Characters that as they develop, border more on the ridiculous than on the understanding. And I mean like unnaturally ridiculous. I'll save more specific examples for the spoiler section, but I'll say this. After a while, I started treating characters that were supposed to be intimidating more like jokes than a real threat. This was simply down to outrageous dialogue and character decisions. It just seemed too unbelievable, even in this game's universe. The main point I'm trying to make is that trying to make a serious point doesn't really work if the character you use in your explanation of that point are thought of more like jokes than anything else. It just doesn't have as much of an impact as the game developers would want it to. Now I'm going to start dropping spoilers like they're dank memes, so skip to this part of the video if you don't want to be spoiled. Okay? You skipping there? Are they gone? Yeah, okay, I think they're gone. Alright, let's tackle three main areas: time travel plot holes, certain character developments, and the ending, and boy do I have some thoughts on that. Let's start with the plot holes. Over the course of the game, Max discovers her powers can go further than simple time travel, but the way these are implemented seem rather like a Deus Ex Machina as opposed to a new mechanic that would be critical to other aspects of the story. More specifically, if we look at Kate's potential suicide, Max temporarily has the ability to freeze time. As a side effect, the powers are temporarily unavailable. It makes for probably the highlight of the episode, because time travel wasn't able to save you if you effed up. Of course you could just replay the chapter, but whatever. I wanted to see more of this, and I was legitimately excited to see what they would do with this new ability, but it's never used again. Heck, they never even mention it after episode 2. How did she do it in the first place? There's no indication that there's a limit to the rewind powers, yet Max seems always overly cautious about using energy, but how does she know how much it affects her? The only indication the player gets that it's hurting her is the cliche nosebleeds and her temporary blackouts, which literally only occur in 3 of the 5 episodes. Where were they in episodes 3 and 4? We used our powers quite a lot in those episodes too. Did they forget? I feel like these criticisms could easily be addressed, and it would make the powers feel a lot more concrete to us, the players, instead of mysterious and oddly convenient when the need arises. The alternative timeline sequences, while being really effective at giving good cliffhangers, end up being incredibly pointless when you look at the grand scheme of things. You already know that you're not staying in the universe because that would retcon every other decision you made before episode 4, but you leave that parallel universe and it literally has no impact on the overall story. It was meaningless. The emotional weight that was supposed to be involved with deciding whether to end Chloe's life or not loses all of its power when literally 30 seconds later you teleport back into the original timeline. It might as well have not given you a choice. I could get it if it built some character development in a different setting, but practically every relationship Max had was reversed. She was friends with the bullies and didn't like her friends. So it's only there, I guess, to be a ruse. These sections and the alternative timeline in episode 5 felt really gratuitous, especially in my second playthrough, because I knew that no matter what I did in this timeline, it would have quite literally no effects on anything. It certainly wasn't worth an hour's worth of gameplay, which could have been spent on character development or plot progression in the actual timeline. Don't make a shocking twist if it doesn't amount to anything. Not to mention, the game breaks its logic while in this alternative timeline. By Max preventing William's death, chaos theory or the butterfly effect or whatever you want to call it takes place, in that a lot of things in the future changed, like Chloe's health, Max's friends, and her relationships with people, basically showing that one change in the past can affect a lot of factors in the future. But when she returns to the photo to make things right, she still changes some things in that state. I break this down pretty well in my actual peep plays of episode 4. Here's a sample of what I'm talking about.
You went back in time. Now, following this game's logic, if you went back in time and you changed the course of history, you burned a photo, you were talking to Chloe about, oh, I'm so sorry, none of that stuff happened, because if it was the actual timeline, you wouldn't have known that William was going to die, so you wouldn't have all of a sudden been like, oh, I'm sorry, but you burned the photo, that was pretty significant. So why is every single thing in present day the exact same? Surely if you're following this game's logic where you change the course of history and everything in the present world was messed up, you didn't change the course of history to the point where somebody died, but you changed the course of history to the point that a photo now doesn't exist because you burned it, and also you know, Chloe would now view that event differently because she would probably say, oh, the day my father died, why were you coming up to me and being like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
So when the game itself doesn't obey the scientific boundaries it just set itself, it takes me out of it even further. In addition, I did mention briefly about some characters being more like jokes than actual human beings, so let's talk about them, starting with Victoria. I get that they wanted to portray her as the stereotypical bully, but then turn it around and say that she's just really self-conscious, but that turn is really sudden if you ask me. Like, in 3 episodes, she is the blueprint of the high school pretty girl bully character.
Yeah, okay, listen. This girl is literally, like, if you're writing a story and you want to, like, can I get the most stereotypical bully character in a school setting? This is the girl that would pop out. If you would like throw in every single cliche trope. She's got a posse, she thinks she's smart, she's flipping exploitative to that teacher guy. You know, oh my gosh, she's flirting with him, and she's like mean for no reason.
But her acts of bullying seem so unmotivated, like refusing to let Max get to the dorm in episode 1. Why? How do you get your kicks out of this? Or relentlessly tormenting Kate in episode 2? Why? What did Kate do to you that you treat her in particular so badly? Her acts of bullying would make more sense to me if they had a purpose to them, as opposed to just, I could do this and make her life a living hell for no reason. Yeah, let's do it. Her bullying people just to impress her friends seems more like a cop-out reason than an actual character motivation, and it still doesn't explain why it's the case. It just seems like lazy writing to me. Victoria seems like a character who, when she turns face in episode 4, seems pretty out of the blue. But it gets worse. The character of Nathan is hilariously insane. I know that we discover that he is actually insane, but after like episode 2, I stopped treating his character as a real threat and instead as a Shakespearean villain. He has some of the worst dialogue I think in the whole game, it lacks subtlety, it's so overdramatic, and when you start viewing him more like comic relief, it becomes a lot more enjoyable. While you might say that his lack of subtlety and overdramatic nature is intentionally written that way because of his mental condition, then I think the developers need to understand that some people might view that more as funny than as threatening. If Victoria coming out and showing some goodness came out of the blue, then Nathan doing it in episode 5 came out of the black. I mean, it just seems more like an attempt by the developers to make every character have some goodness to them, and it just seems to me pretty tacked on and, again, meaningless, especially considering his actions throughout the entire game. Trying to justify it all under doesn't exactly fly with me, because of all the stuff he did himself, like bringing guns to school twice, shoving his wealth into other people's faces, or just being overly bullying for no reason like other characters. If you can believe it, I don't even think Nathan's change of face was the worst. Mr. Jefferson, of all people, had probably the worst change of face I think in the entire game. Never mind out of the blue or black, it came out of the freaking colour spectrum. Similarly to my issue with the alternative timeline, it made for a great cliffhanger ending for episode 4, but its meaning was kind of lost to me when I discovered where it all came from. Mr. Jefferson opens up episode 5 and is quite literally the polar opposite of how he was the previous 4 episodes, but not even in a Kaiser Soze kind of way. It's like a completely different character. He just freaking Bond villain monologues his way through taking pictures of Max, and his reasoning for it is pretty freaking dumb. You mean to tell me that this really successful art photographer wants to see innocence turn to corruption? And the only way he sees fit in doing this is to take pictures of actual human subjects and drug them to the point of them not remembering it? I mean, I get the purpose, but do you understand that you can't exactly show these pictures to anyone? This is literally just a hobby for you and nothing else. It's a pretty anticlimactic end to the Rachel Amber storyline if you ask me, because she was just an accident in Mr. Jefferson's hobby. Was it surprising? Yes. Was it dumb? Yes. Don't make a shocking twist if it doesn't amount to anything. And how did he get the Prescotts to pay for all this in the first place? Where is the revenue coming from? Did they just pour all this money into this dark room to have Jefferson take photos he can't sell because then he'd immediately be busted? It's like a serial killer taking pictures of his victims before killing them and then sharing these pictures on Instagram. This entire reveal just seemed completely nonsensical to me, which is really disappointing because the build-up was actually really good in my eyes for the Rachel Amber storyline, and for it to end like this, it's pretty upsetting. Ironically, the previous sentence was kind of foreshadowing my thoughts on the entire ending of this game, so let's get into it, shall we? The ending of this game, both of them, sucked. I mean, the entirety of episode 5 was nowhere near as good as the previous 4, and I didn't even love the previous 4 like others did. While some people do say that episodes 1 through 4 are exceptional, and that episode 5 shouldn't affect your experience of the overall game, the journey is more important than the destination, then that's both true and false. True in the fact that I was legitimately getting interested in where it was going, I mean, you need only look at my criticisms so far to understand why I wasn't as engrossed into it as others were, but the final 2 episodes kinda intrigued me into how it was going to wrap up. So I do see the point from the perspective of the person who was entranced by this game and was loving how all the choices were playing out. However, it is false because my build up and genuine excitement for the game wasn't as much a result of how good the game was up to that point, but that I was intrigued to see how Dontnod wrapped this whole thing up. Jefferson's in on it. What's his motive? Is he working with the Prescotts? How do we stop him? How will the storm end? But more importantly, how will my choices up to this point in the game affect the outcome? And the answer to a lot of these questions was pretty disappointing. Therefore, all of my intrigue goes out the window once I realise what happened, and I'm more disappointed than I was before, because what I just witnessed was wasted potential. The potential was finally beginning to show its face, but as quickly as it arrived, it vanished. You can't deny that the destination is still a pretty freaking huge part of making a good game great, or unfortunately in this case, the reverse. The entire episode to me just felt like filler until it reached an unfulfilling conclusion. The potential was there to fully explore the other 2 plot points that were unresolved, that being the Prescott's Pan Estates and the tornado, but instead we get a lot of scenes that make me feel I was watching a David Lynch movie than progressing the game. It was certainly interesting the first time you experience it, but on my second playthrough, this entire episode was a real chore to get through. Not to mention, loose ends up the ass. Samuel and his crazy way of looking at life, never seen in episode 5. Almost every student in Blackwell you interacted with, never seen in episode 5. Heck, Kate, who was at the helm of the most important decision in episode 2, is only seen in a nightmare sequence in episode 5. So, what was the point in these decisions again? Why did I even try to interact with them? Most of the decisions you make are either unresolved or meaningless to not only the overall story, but to your experience because you never know how they're resolved. Now, I'm certainly not saying that I want every single thing to be neatly wrapped up in the end with a big red bow, but my issue is that they're barely even referred to, let alone resolved. Makes the players who spent the extra time doing these things kind of feel like they wasted their time. And the worst part is that ultimately, every decision you made in the entire game comes down to 2 choices. Do you sacrifice Chloe or Arcadia Bay? That's it. Let's deal with each ending individually and why they just didn't sit well with me. If you sacrifice Chloe, then that reverses the entire game back to the start of episode 1. Max doesn't intervene in her death, Chloe dies, Nathan and Jefferson get arrested, happily ever after, right? Wrong! Not for the player, who just spent the entire potentially 10 months getting engrossed in a game just to tell them that their decisions throughout ultimately didn't matter. Kate is still suicidal, Victoria still hates you, you accomplish nothing in the in-game universe. Max is the only one who remembers all these events the first time they happened, and she's going to have to keep them to herself because if she says a word of it to anyone else, she'll be thrown in the same mental asylum as Nathan for having memories of a girl that died. The actual resolution to the storm is pretty confusing as well. So the game is trying to say that the storm was caused by Chloe defying death, and her accepting her fate and dying on the bathroom floor will save the lives of everyone else and the storm won't exist. As vague as this theory is, I could buy it. Had the storm vision not happened first, literally, the very first thing you see in the game is Max walking to the lighthouse and seeing the storm. Keep in mind at this time, nothing has changed, nobody has cheated death, and she doesn't even realise that she has time travel powers yet. So why would Chloe's death cause it if the storm came first? I could understand if it was a flash forward or something, but it wasn't. Max witnesses it for the first time at the same time the player does, so that breaks his own logic. Not to mention, Max gets these time travel powers, spends all this time through 5 episodes using them, only to come to the realization that she shouldn't use them? What? So the gods, or whatever gave Max these powers, gave her them with the intention that she doesn't even use them and then they go away? It makes the entire game and its premise kind of pointless in the end. This makes the sacrifice Chloe ending meaningless from a gameplay perspective and defy logic from a story perspective. None of your choices mattered, the storm magically disappears, the end. At least the ending song was really good. I actually had my own theory on why it wasn't Chloe's death that caused the tornado, but that's so heavily flawed because of what the game presents us that I can barely even present it in this video. I guess you just have to take what you're given. If you choose to sacrifice Arcadia Bay, this at least keeps your decisions consistent with the rest of the game, as Max chooses not to go back in time, stupidly rips up the photo in an act of defiance, and watches the tornado rip through the town, killing every character you grew to love. While its premise makes more sense from a gameplay standing, in that your choices still mattered to the characters still alive, that is also its flaws. No one is still alive. I mean, Max and Chloe survive, but decisions involving every other character that isn't Max and Chloe, yeah, they happened, but they're meaningless. Did you save Kate's life? Doesn't matter, she's dead. Did you kill or injure Frank? Doesn't matter, he's dead. Did you kiss or hug Warren? Doesn't matter, he's dead. Do you see my point? The only choices that still remain are the ones that Max and Chloe shared, like whether they kissed or not. Again, kind of makes your decisions pointless, but at least they still happened, unlike the other ending. Not to mention, this ending is executed a lot worse than ending 1. Chloe goes from sobbing and begging you to let her die, only to lower her voice and immediately be okay with the fact that Max just killed her family and friends and everyone she knew just to save her. It just really conflicts with how you just saw her act. They both somehow managed to be the only survivors of an E6 tornado, plus their car makes it out in one piece, and they just drive through the ruins of Arcadia Bay before they leave for destinations unknown. And that's it. That's it! Don't look for survivors, don't even try to scavenge for anything, not even the tornado-proof bunker. You're just gonna leave? Chloe takes the fact that her entire family got killed very well, and it just is very uncharacteristic for both characters to act. I almost feel like ending 1, as illogical as it is, was the ending the developers considered canon, but they threw this ending in for people who just loved Chloe's character so much they're willing to kill an entire town for her. But that's not even satisfying because you don't get anything out of it. There's no heart, there's no action, there's no nothing. It's just lazy. They even recycled the same ending song from episode 1. Okay, here's what I would have done differently if they were so desperate to keep both endings as they were. In the Sacrifice Chloe ending, remove the tornado coming first. That would at least make the Chloe dying theory or even my cheating death theory have ground to stand on. Let Chloe die in the bathroom like they want, but instead of cutting to photos of Max just doing lonely stuff like her life is hella depressing after Chloe's death, replace it with pictures of Max interacting with the people the player had chosen to interact with in their respective playthrough of the game. Since in this ending, Max loses her powers after Chloe's death, she can't possibly mess around with the timelines anymore. She can just use her memories of her adventures with Chloe to influence how she treats everyone around her. So, if the player took the time to befriend Victoria and see the good side of her, there's a picture of Max and Victoria hanging out and doing non-bully things. If the player became romantically interested in Warren, then a picture of the two of them on a date. If the player sympathised with David, then a picture of Joyce and David, still a happy couple after Chloe's death, maybe taking Max under their wing and treating her like their own daughter. You see what I mean? Make the players feel like their decisions still meant something in the universe that Max ends up with. Also, it makes the funeral scene a lot more impactful when you see who you ended up befriending and whatnot. Now, everything I just said could very well have happened in the actual ending we were given, but my problem was that there was no indication that it did happen. Everyone got the same ending, there's no diversity in anyone's, and for a decision-based game, that's a big no-no. The Sacrifice Arcadia Bay ending is a lot harder to say. I'm assuming that after Max blacks out, she can only rewind as far as her waking up from the blackout, so she can't rewind back far enough to tell everyone about the tornado, so she can't even try to save anyone else. It just seems pretty illogical for Max and Chloe to not even attempt to look for survivors. The rather hyperbolic writing of the game in general indicates that everyone will die regardless. So if that's the case, then the only possible thing that could save it is a little closure. Maybe Max and Chloe could have driven back to Seattle and reunited with Max's family. Maybe Max pursues her photography in memory of everyone from Arcadia Bay, all the innocent people that she killed. Chloe could get back into whatever Chloe's interested in, knowing that she has to do something with herself because she was given this ultimate second chance at life, and the two of them can live happily together in Seattle, romantically or otherwise. It's a worse ending than the previous one, absolutely, but it at least gives some closure and there's at least some heart to it, unlike what we were given. So, with all that in mind, would I want to see a Life is Strange 2 or Season 2 or whatever they call it? Yes, I absolutely would. I know this might come as a surprise to some of you, especially after some of the harsh things I've said about the game, but I'd like to see a Season 2 for two reasons. Number one, because a lot of the criticisms in this video is stuff that could easily be resolved if they just spent a little more time tweaking certain areas of the game, and a lot of these gripes are just things that a gaming company's first attempt at a new style of game would have, and so if they came back with a second season, I would have a lot more faith that they put a bit more polish into areas such as side characters or plot holes. And the second reason is because I do like the world they've created. I feel like it has a lot more stories to tell. Sure, the internet hip culture atmosphere can be polarizing, but it's one I would certainly like to see more stories being told in. Plus, it absolutely has a fan base. Here's my criteria for Season 2 of Life is Strange. Set it in a different location, with a whole new cast of characters and a brand new superpower, but keep the internet hip culture consistent. Actually, tone it down just a tad bit. Address my simple and universal criticisms, like uninteresting side characters, and reduce the potential plot holes caused by the power, and boom! That, my friends, is the recipe for a very, very solid story-based game, and easily could become the best one ever made. But we're not reviewing that potential game, we're reviewing this game, and so what are my concluding thoughts? Here's the thing with Life is Strange. It's an emotion simulator. You can tell, especially in later episodes, that they really try to hit you hard with the feels cannon. And so a lot of people get a lot more invested into the game because it allowed them to reach that emotional state over fictitious events, as good pieces of media should do. But for this video, I know I have to view the game objectively rather than subjectively. I certainly enjoyed the game and its quirkiness, and I could draw parallels between the banter with Max and Chloe with similar encounters I've had with my childhood friends, but I cannot in good conscience say, I felt this while playing it, so I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. Because how I feel about the events of the game emotionally will differ from how you might feel about the events. Rather, I have to view the game through objective eyes, to see how effective the game developers were at getting me to that emotional state, and how easily it will be for other people that aren't me to get to that emotional state. And because I didn't feel as much as I think I should have because of my issues with the game, I can't recommend it just on that basis alone. Other reviewers might, and that's perfectly fine, but this is my opinion of the game, and therefore I can't draw that conclusion. Too many flaws in the story kept on taking me out of feeling the emotions that the developers wanted me to feel. With this in mind, I would consider Life is Strange more like a great guilty pleasure than a game I would say is objectively great, but with Season 2 and hopefully some more polish to it, I'm hoping this series can remove the guilty pleasure out of my impression of it and make the game simply great. My name's P-Dog, I hope you guys enjoyed this in-depth look at Life is Strange, and I'll see you guys next time.
Sunshine for everyone, but as far as I can remember, we've been migratory animals living under changing weather. Someday we will foresee obstacles